morning, everybody.
Morning.
I'd like to welcome you all this lovely November 2nd morning. This morning we have Dr. Bonnie Dobbs here, and she will talk about how Parkinson's disease affects a person's ability to drive, how individuals and their family members can determine if driving abilities have declined to an unsafe level, and how to stay mobile when it is no longer safe to drive. Dr. Bonnie Dobbs is a professor in the Department of Family Medicine and the director of the Medically at-Risk Driver Center at the University of Alberta. So, would you please give me a hand in welcoming Dr. Bonnie Dobbs.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Thank you for coming out on this blustery November day. How's my volume? I'm okay? And thank you for the introduction. You might be wondering what our Medically at-Risk Driver Center is. So first, I'm a professor in the Department of Family Medicine, and I'm a gerontologist by training, which means that I specialize in aging. And I've been interested in aging and how we can successfully age, and then how we often don't successfully age for many years. And I must admit that I love what I do. Our Medically at-Risk Driver Center is an official research center at the University of Alberta, and our research focuses on illnesses that affect a person's ability to drive. And a lot of our research has been done on how an illness such as dementia affects a person's driving ability. And I'm going to talk about some of that research and show you some video clips of people with dementia behind the wheel, which will hopefully emphasize to you the importance of us paying attention to this and making sure that when it's time for people to move from the driver's seat to the passenger seat because of an illness, that they should do so. It also is the case in the event that I forget to talk about it during my presentation, that often people think that people become unsafe to drive because of age. So if you're a senior driver, that we should be looking at your driving abilities. And there is now ample research that indicates that it's not age that affects a person's ability to drive, but rather an illness. And that's why we have a Medically at-Risk Driver Center, not a seniors driver center, because we're not targeting seniors. What we're wanting to do is to correct some of those myths. And if you're a 30-year-old with an illness, or you're a 50-year-old with an illness that affects your ability to drive, or you're an 80-year-old with an illness that affects your ability to drive, it's the illness that it's the illness that we should be concentrating on, and not the person's age. So, Parkinson's disease. I suspect that all of you have you attended presentations on what Parkinson's disease is? Okay, so this is something that I can just run through rather quickly. So, as you know, it's a neurodegenerative disorder, and what does that mean? Neuro refers to the nerve cells, and degeneration refers to progressive damage. And it's not surprising that as we get older, we're more likely to have an illness such as Parkinson's disease, because the aging process in and of itself is associated with degeneration. So our muscles atrophy, our reflex is slow, there's lots of normal age-related changes, and that's part of the degeneration. Parkinson's disease is a little bit different in that it affects the nerve cells in the brain that produce dopamine. And as you know, with Parkinson's disease, there's a reduction in dopamine, and that's a chemical that carries the signals between the nerves in the brain. And importantly, it affects the nerve cells that are responsible for movement and coordination, and hence the early symptoms of Parkinson's disease, not surprisingly, relate to this movement and coordination. So some of the hallmark symptoms of Parkinson's disease are tremors, and it often starts off as they call it a pill rolling, a tremor in the hands, and then of course it can spread. There's also a slowness, a stiffness, and there's balance problems. And again, I suspect that you're all very familiar with these symptoms. I don't know how many of you know that Michael J. Fox has been very, very instrumental in raising funding for Parkinson's research. So Michael J. Fox, he was born in Edmonton in 1961, and as you know, he was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease at a very young age. And since 2000, his foundation has funded more than $450 million in research for Parkinson's disease. So it's nice to have a Canadian connection and an Edmonton connection. In terms of Parkinson's, as you likely know, there's changes in sensory abilities, so some of the symptoms can be blurred vision, double vision, eyelid spasm, and then changes in our perceptual abilities, changes in color vision, difficulty in judging distances, visual hallucinations, and changes in motor abilities, so tremor, stiffness of the limbs and trunk, slowed movement, and impaired balance. And you might be wondering why I'm concentrating on these three main categories, so sensory, motor, and perceptual. And that's because when you put the keys in the car or you use your automatic unlock and you get behind the wheel, these are all of the abilities that you need in order to drive safely. And of course there's cognitive abilities that I'll talk about. What's interesting is if you look at the research literature on Parkinson's disease and cognitive impairment or dementia, there's a strong relationship between the two. So many individuals who develop Parkinson's disease will, as the disease progresses, end up with a dementia. And that's one of the things that people with Parkinson's disease have to prepare for. Not everyone develops dementia, but a substantial number do. There's also emotional impairment in terms of apathy and impulsivity. So how do we treat Parkinson's disease? There's a number of medications, and I haven't provided the full list of medications, but there's the gold standard, I guess, would be levodopa, and then there's also the anticholinergics. And the reason that I'm pointing these out is that even though these medications help a person with Parkinson's disease, there's also side effects that can affect a person's ability to drive. So you can well imagine if you're on levodopa and you have sleepiness or dizziness or blurred vision and confusion, then that's going to affect your ability to drive safely. In terms of the anticholinergics, also the confusion and sedation can affect your ability to drive safely. But it's really important to point out that not every person, every patient experiences these side effects, and often the side effects can be decreased or diminished simply by reducing dosage. But that's something that is important for you and your physician to talk about and implement. So in terms of individuals with Parkinson's disease, and I suspect that there's a number of you here today that do have Parkinson's disease, how many of you have had an accident, a crash, a little fender bender in the last year? Any incidents? Are there any new dents or dings in your car? Do you feel confident behind the wheel? No. How many of you, are there times where you don't feel confident behind the wheel? Are your, and you can answer these by putting up your hand, but if you decide not to, that's fine with me. Are your reflexes fast enough in case of a short stop or a needed swerve? So if you're going down a residential street, you're in a school district, all of a sudden a little kid runs out, are your reflexes fast enough in order to allow you to stop quickly? And I think that's a good question for all of us, because I think that we all get behind the wheel at times where we may not be at our absolute best, or we may be tired, or we may be distracted. Certainly we know that the number of people who are distracted behind the wheel today with or without Parkinson's disease is increasing. It's interesting, if you look at the crash rates of people who use their cell phones while driving, those crash rates are 3 to 4 to 5 to 6 times higher than people not using their cell phones behind the wheel. Guess what happens when you text behind the wheel? The crash rates increase to 18 to 24 times that of people who are not texting behind the wheel. How many of you have seen at least one person texting behind the wheel on the way to this presentation today? So that's something that I think that our politicians and our decision makers in terms of policymakers have to address, is that we simply have to get people to leave their cell phones in their briefcases or in their purses or lock them in the trunk when they're behind the wheel, because the number of crashes, the number of fatalities, if you look at the data from the United States, the number of fatalities and crashes are increasing, and increasingly they're due to texting while driving and not as much due to alcohol impaired driving or drug impaired driving. Not saying that that's going away, but all of a sudden texting while driving and using the cell phone while driving are increasingly responsible for more of the crashes. I know what I do to prevent me from using my cell or texting behind the wheel is I don't even have my cell phone in the front seat with me. It's either in my briefcase in the back or it's in my trunk, and that way you're not tempted to use it. How many of you use your cell phones behind the wheel? At least once. How many of you use your cell phone at least once?
You can phone using your cell phone without actually, an automatic system.
Yeah, so the observation is that that you can talk on your cell phone while you're behind the wheel, and I think what your question is, and you're not distracted. In fact, you are distracted. So first off, just dialing the number is a distraction, and then having that conversation. The research shows that there's a difference between people talking on their cell phone while driving as opposed to having someone in the passenger seat. And what it is it's the cognitive engagement. It's the engagement of your cognitive ability. So instead of concentrating on what you're doing on the road, is you're paying more attention to your conversation. So even if you look at the data, so someone who uses their cell phone and having a conversation and they have it on speaker, the distraction increases. And like I say, it's different than talking to someone in the passenger seat. So my recommendation to anyone is to just, if you're behind the wheel, it's a very cognitively complex task, even though we've all been doing it for decades and decades. Our driving environment is getting more complex. That's your task when you're behind the wheel, and you shouldn't be doing anything else. Would you feel, so distracted driving, either talking on the cell phone, texting while driving, certainly increases crash risk. Alcohol impaired driving increases crash risk. Drug impaired driving increases crash risk, as do illnesses such as Parkinson's disease. And it's particularly because of the effect on our cognitive abilities, or on your cognitive abilities, or on a person's cognitive abilities and their motor function. One of the things that you can do, and as the disease progresses, so it sounds like most of you today are very comfortable in terms of your driving, but as the disease progresses, at some point you're likely going to have to move from the driver's seat to the passenger seat. So some of the symptoms or the red flags that I talk about today, I think will be useful to you and your family in terms of deciding when to make that transition. And it's really important that you don't make the transition so early that you impair your mobility, because we know that having a driver's license and being able to drive is really independence. If you can no longer drive, then how are you going to get around? And some of us have family members that can drive us, but often then it makes you feel like you're no longer independent, you're always having to rely on somebody. There's other people that don't have any family members, and then what do you do? And I'm going to talk about some of the resources that we have in Edmonton that you can use to stay mobile. One of the things that's interesting is in the current cohort of older adults, if the male has the illness, then often, even if they're married, that the husband and the wife are often immobilized when a license is taken away. And that's because in the current cohort of older people, often the female didn't drive, or the female has a license, but it tended to be driving was the male responsibility. So out of interest of the females in the audience, how many of you have a valid driver's license? And how many of you routinely drive frequently? Okay. So the landscape is shifting. I know that for the baby boomers, sorry?
She drives on her own, but not when I'm with her, then I gotta drive, okay?
And do you complain about his driving? I know my husband always talks about me complaining about his driving. No, my husband always complains about me complaining about his driving. One of the things that's interesting is how there's generational shifts. I know with the baby boomers, if you look at the licensing rates of baby boomers, there are about as many men licensed to drive in the baby boomers as the 65 and older population. And baby boomers are starting to be older than 65. But for females, the licensing rates of female baby boomers are way higher than for our mothers and our grandmothers. And like I said, that was because in those generations, driving was particularly a male responsibility. So it'll be interesting to see if the female baby boomers give as much pushback when it comes time to taking away their license as the males. So I'm going to show you some driving clips now, and these are driving clips of individuals with a dementia, not necessarily due to Parkinson's disease, so they have a dementia. And all of these individuals were actively driving. And at the time that we started the research program, the physicians, either the family physician or the specialist, referred the individual into the research program. And it's a dual brake car, and there's a driving evaluator sitting in the passenger seat. And at the time that these individuals participated in the research, they all indicated that they felt like they were safe to drive, and as I mentioned, that they were actively driving.
And then one turn here.
Let's just reduce that. We'll reduce that. Yeah.
And then one turn here, please.
That's part of the unawareness or the impact on the cognitive abilities. So that gentleman was driving down the side street. There was this oncoming vehicle, and for whatever reason, he just simply wasn't aware and made a unsafe left turn. Of interest, we've got many of the driving clips where the driving examiner intervened. In this case, the driving examiner intervened, I think, because he was confident that there wasn't going to be a crash, but certainly if he thought there was going to be a crash, he would have intervened. In this case, the driving evaluator does take control, and he takes control in that the vehicle that they're in, it has dual brakes. So there's the regular brake on the driver's side, and then there's a brake on the passenger side, and the driving evaluator used that to prevent a crash. What's interesting about this driver, and again, this driver has a dementia, she's a female. When she approaches the intersection, and it's on a side street, there's a yield sign on her right, which means she doesn't have to stop. She does stop, but she doesn't have to. But you watch as she looks carefully both ways, and then she starts to proceed. and the driving evaluator uses the dual brake to avoid her hitting the pedestrian. And what's interesting is the driver has absolutely no awareness of what has gone on. One of the interesting take-home messages from this driving clip is that if you ask that lady when she got out of the vehicle at the end of her drive how she did, she would have said, and in fact she did say, I did just fine. There was nothing, I didn't make any errors, there was nothing unusual about my drive. And that's what dementia does to an individual as the disease progresses, is it robs a person not only of their ability to drive, but it also robs the person of their insight that their driving is impaired. And that's why it's often very important for physicians, the medical community, when a couple go in, that they ask the wife or the husband about the driving, depending on who the patient is. Because if you ask the patient, if you ask someone with dementia if they're safe to drive, 99.999% will say, I'm absolutely safe, even if they had a crash 10 minutes ago, or even if they've had some fender benders or some unusual driving situations. This lady has a dementia as well, and they're on the freeway. James asks the driver to make a left-hand turn in order to transition off the freeway, and the road that they're on, there's one of those dedicated left turns, and those are really helpful in terms of helping us make left turns. But in this instance, she gets into that dedicated left turn late, and as she's turning, for whatever reason, and it's because of her dementia, she ends up straightening out, and she's now going down the freeway the wrong way. And there's oncoming vehicles flashing their lights, and of course James recognizes it, but the driver has absolutely no awareness that she is going down the freeway the wrong way. So you can see she gets over the highway.
Yes, turn right, please. Yes.
We have hundreds of these driving clips, and what's interesting is the vast majority of the driving clips, James is very cool and calm, but you can hear the concern in his voice in this instance. So these are just a few of the driving clips of people, as I mentioned, with the dementia behind the wheel. So I think that hopefully this convinces you that if you have an illness that results in your ability to drive, so if it affects either your sensory, your vision, your motor, your ability to put the car in gears, not so much, but to be able to maneuver, if it affects your ability to shoulder check, if it affects your ability to know where your foot is on the gas pedal, or if it affects your cognitive ability, so your ability to attend, to pay attention, or if it affects your memory, then those are really important red flags that perhaps you should move from the driver's seat to the passenger seat. One of the things that's interesting with an illness such as dementia, the effect on memory is important in that at some point, for example, the individual will forget that a stop sign means stop, or that a green light means go, or that a red light means stop. So there's lots of reasons why we don't want people with a cognitive impairment or dementia behind the wheel if their cognitive abilities are impaired to the level that they are unsafe to drive. So what are some of the red flags that you can watch for, and as a general public that we can watch for? So driving too slowly. Often people think that if you're driving down the White Mud Freeway and you're not quite as sharp as you used to be, then it's just maybe better if you go 40 or 50 kilometers an hour instead of the speed limit. Well, that's a hazard to other road users because the expectation is that you're going to go the speed limit. Some of the other red flags: stopping in traffic for no apparent reason, or ignoring traffic signs. It's not that the person has ignored the traffic sign, it means that they no longer understand what that traffic sign means. And as I mentioned, they don't realize that, or they have forgotten that a stop sign means stop or a yield sign means yield. Getting lost along a familiar route. We've all read newspaper stories about a person with a dementia where they've left home and they find them 300 kilometers away and they were just going to the grocery store, or sometimes they don't find them at all. Difficulty executing turns and lane changes. You saw that in the videos that I showed you. Drifting into other traffic lanes or driving on the wrong side of the street. I don't know how many of you remember the episode in California a number of years ago, and he was an elderly driver, and he propelled his vehicle through the Santa Monica farmers market, and 10 people were killed and 60 or 70 people were injured. And what was interesting about Mr. Weller, and it was found after his accident that he indeed had a dementia. What was interesting was that there were many signs, red flags for the family, for the neighbors, for the law enforcement community, but nobody did anything to report Mr. Weller. And in fact, his physician didn't worry about the driving issue. So when the law enforcement officers went to investigate the Santa Monica farmers market crash, and they went to Mr. Weller's home, it was obvious that he had run into the side of his garage a number of times. It was obvious that he had run into his mailbox a number of times, but his family, his neighbors, no one did anything. Just before the Santa Monica farmers market crash, a law enforcement officer had stopped Mr. Weller for whatever reason and let him go. So even the law enforcement officer didn't pick up on the cues or didn't pay attention to the fact that Mr. Weller was unsafe to drive. And I often talk about this incident in that if it only takes one person to intervene, and then, or it would have taken one person to intervene, and we wouldn't be talking about the Santa Monica farmers market crash. And I also talk about it because you can well imagine the effect that it has on Mr. Weller, his family, and his neighbors. I have personal experience with the driving issue in that my mom had a dementia. My mom had Alzheimer's disease, and she recognized early in her illness that she either wasn't comfortable behind the wheel or something had happened because she decided to give up her license. And when I mean something happened, I think that she may have had a little fender bender in a Safeway parking lot, or I don't know, but I know that she decided on her own to give up her license, and that's not usually the case. But what made our situation so interesting is I have 6 siblings, and all of my siblings, except my older sister, pushed my mother to drive again. There's nothing wrong with you. Get behind the wheel. The only reason you're having these problems is because you're bored, you're not getting out enough. You need to start going and getting more engaged in community activities. So she started to drive again, but she only drove for about 2 weeks, and then she said, to hell with you kids, I'm not driving. But what that told me, that incident, was that the driving issue is far more complex than just the driving. Because if my, and here's my interpretation of it, if my siblings had to accept that our mother was no longer safe to drive, they had to admit that she had a dementia. and they didn't want to admit that she had a dementia. And I think part of it was that it's a progressive disease, but I think it was also, if she has a dementia, she's no longer driving, then we have to step in and take responsibility in terms of helping her to stay mobile, and people have busy lives and they didn't want to do that. So guess what at the end of the day, the message is that we need to be engaged, and there's negative consequences of no longer being able to drive, but such as how are you going to get around, how are you going to stay independent, how it means that your kids or other people have to step up to the plate and provide some transportation. But isn't that what family and friends are all about? And now there's more resources. So the driving issue, the having an illness is, there's lots of complexities to having an illness, but the driving issue seems to bring out a lot of the other issues, and it's because of the fact that driving is so important to our mobility and independence. But having said that, we do need to pay attention to it for safety of the individual and safety for the public. Some other red flags: not noticing other vehicles, pedestrians, road hazards, becoming drowsy or falling asleep behind the wheel, getting into near-miss situations, fender benders or other accidents, and then getting tickets for traffic violations. And that often is a warning sign to driver fitness and monitoring. So all of a sudden, if a person's getting a lot of traffic tickets, then they may start investigating to see if there's medical conditions. The Parkinson Alberta has a wonderful handout on Parkinson's disease and driving, and I don't know if you're familiar with it. Are you guys familiar with the handout? Okay, if not, we could get that for you. So let's move now to talk about giving up the keys. So giving up your driver's license, first off, doesn't mean that you have to give up. It may mean, and in fact it may be one of the most important decisions that you make in terms of your own well-being and the well-being of others, because it could mean saving your life or the life of someone you love, or the life of someone that you don't love. It also shows that you care about yourself and those who may be put in harm's way. The people in the Santa Monica Farmers Market crash, their lives were changed forever at one instant. So how can you stay mobile? I mean, we're just all so used to walking out of the house and getting in our cars and going where we want to go. And a vehicle, there's no doubt about it, the driver's license represents freedom. It represents independence. So somehow or other we need to figure out how to allow people with illnesses that affect their ability to drive to stay almost as mobile and almost as independent. Certainly there's the Edmonton transit system. How many of you have a bus pass? Yeah. Okay. So one of the nice things is for seniors, so individuals 65 and older, there is a reduced rate, and there's a reduced rate for low-income seniors as well. Having said that, the Edmonton transit system, either the buses or the LRT, it's a great way to get around, but it's not as convenient. And as we get older, it becomes less convenient, and it becomes less convenient because if you've transitioned from your vehicle to using the bus, it usually means that you have an illness, or you may have always used Edmonton transit system. But let's concentrate on the people that were driving. It's December 4th. It's minus 30 degrees. It's just snowed 5 feet. What's the probability that you're going to be able to comfortably and safely use Edmonton Transit? First, it's cold. If you have to walk from home to the bus stop, that's not always an easy chore. And particularly if the snowplows have come and cleared the snow, and there's all these windrows. So now you have to crawl over this windrow to get to the bus stop. Many of our bus stops don't have benches. Many of the bus stops don't have shelters. If the bus stops do have shelters, they're glass shelters that, do they keep out the cold? I don't think so. You know, so there's lots of reasons that people don't use transit, particularly in the winter in Edmonton. There's also DATS. How many of you are familiar with DATS? Okay, so DATS. The one thing I will say about DATS, it's not as convenient as using your own vehicle, and it's not as convenient as using ETS in that there's more of a waiting time, a scheduling time. Having said that, when you look at the use of technology, and DATS has some wonderful software now that's allowing them to schedule the rides more efficiently, it's leap years ahead compared to where it was about 10 years ago. Having said that, there's still waits, but you know, most of us have to wait for some things, so having to wait a little bit longer to use DATS, you have mobility and you know that you're being transported safely. Then taxi cabs. Most companies offer a seniors discount, but they vary by cab company, so it's important to call. And then there's a number of cab companies in Edmonton. I think increasingly the cab drivers of the cab companies in Edmonton are becoming a little bit more aware of and appreciative of the needs of seniors. So that's positive. But I know that when I talk to a lot of individuals 65 and older, they don't want to use the taxi cabs, and there's many reasons that they don't want to, and part of it is that the cabs aren't clean or the cab driver isn't considered enough of the needs of seniors, but like I say, that's changing. How many of you have used cabs? And has it been a positive experience? So that's one of the things that I think that we need to do a little bit more work with, but as I mentioned, I think that's getting better. How many of you have used Uber? How many of you would consider using Uber? Again, there's, I think that may be the transportation of the future, and that there's Lyft in the United States.
It's a 3-minute response time.
I'm sorry?
It's a 3-minute response.
A 3-minute response, yeah. What's interesting about Uber is, I've been following them because it seems to me that is one of the ways that as we get older or age or being older than 65 or younger than 65, it's a pretty efficient way to get around, and it's a lower cost than owning and operating a vehicle. Interestingly, Uber did a research study about 4 or 5 years ago in the United States with senior centers. And what they did is they trained seniors on the use of the app, and then they're providing rides to these senior centers. I haven't seen the results of the research being published, but they're obviously attuned to the fact that this is an important population. So it'll be interesting to see if they start educating their drivers and start providing more responsive transportation to individuals 65 and older, because as I mentioned, it is a pretty important segment of the population. I think that there's advantages and disadvantages to each of these systems, and what you have to do is you have to find a method of transportation if you're no longer driving that works best for you. One of the things that's interesting, so if you drove 250 kilometers a week, the total amount that you spend on your car, and this is for a mid-sized vehicle in Canada, that's for your investment in your vehicle, your operating expenses, is about $10,000 a year. So $833 a month. So if you no longer drove, you could take that money and create a mobility or a transportation account. And what I often talk about is to take even, say, $2,000 and put it in a special bank account. and say, this is my mobility account. And I bet you at the end of the year, if you use that mobility account, that you would probably still have some money, or even if you took $4,000, you'd still have money in that bank account. The difficulty between transitioning from being a driver, having your own independent vehicle, and having to rely on others, is that when we get in our cars every day, we don't take $25 out of our wallet and say, this is what it's costing me to go from A to B today, even though that's what it is. So we have to make this mental shift. So as I mentioned, you can well imagine, so if you have $2,000, $3,000 in a special bank account and use that to get your groceries, to go to social activities, to go to religious activities, at the end of the year, I bet you would still have money in that bank account, and you would have been as mobile as if you were in your car.
I think one of the things to realize is not everybody lives in the city or like in Edmonton, or some are in either rural communities or outside of
Right.
on an acreage or whatever. So
Yeah, that's a very
there's
good
also
point.
that.
Yeah. Now, one of the areas of research, I'm going to digress just for a minute. One of the areas of research that I'm very interested in, and we're very interested in at the MARD Center and have been doing, is looking at how we can get more what we call alternate transportation for seniors implemented in our communities, and not only in Edmonton, but in the rural communities. So we recently did a transportation needs assessment for the Capital Region Board. And the Capital Region Board consists of all of the mayors and the regions in and around Edmonton, so the 24 municipalities. So we hired the Population Research Lab at the University of Alberta to conduct about a 20-minute interview. And we phoned about 2,500 adult children, seniors, individuals 65 and older who drove, individuals 65 and older who didn't drive, and then persons with disabilities. And what we were interested in looking at was, first, what are the unmet transportation needs of seniors and persons with disabilities. And then we also asked about attributes, characteristics of transportation that they would like to see in order to help them stay mobile. The results of that survey, and they're not surprising, but it's great to have data, because then we can give the data to the politicians, and then the politicians can argue for services that are results based. What we found, interestingly, is that even senior drivers in Edmonton, outside of Edmonton, and St. Albert and Sherwood Park, and then in the rural regions, have unmet transportation needs, and I'll talk about those in a minute. And then we looked at the senior non-drivers, and not surprisingly, seniors who don't drive had more unmet transportation needs in each of those three locations, but they were higher for the seniors in rural areas. So if you're a senior in a rural area, or you're a person with disability in a rural area, you're going to have trouble meeting your transportation needs, and particularly for medical appointments. Even seniors who drive, who live in rural areas, have unmet transportation needs for medical appointments. And that's because a lot of people seniors living in rural areas, and probably young people as well, aren't that comfortable coming into the city. And increasingly, for specialized medical testing or to see specialists, you have to come into the urban centers. So our province, and most provinces, have started to concentrate a lot of the sophisticated medical testing in urban centers. So how many people, if you lived in Mundare and you had to come in and see a specialist at the K Clinic, and you're 72 years old or you're 85 years old, and even though you're driving in your own rural community, how comfortable are you going to be driving into Edmonton and coming into the K Clinic and finding your specialist? Not very often. We also know from interviewing seniors that, for example, going to the Cross Cancer for chemotherapy appointments or for renal dialysis or any kind of specialized medical testing, that's a real challenge in terms of meeting those transportation needs. So what we've done with those results from the needs assessment is we've presented it to the capital region, and the intent is, the hope is that they will use those results to argue for more funding for transportation services outside of the public transportation, what I call alternate transportation for seniors. So, you know, the volunteer driver programs or paid driver programs or programs like Driving Miss Daisy, because that's the way that when we talk to seniors, that's the way that most seniors want to have their transportation needs met. Yes.
I'm just sitting at the back here and looking at who's here, and I just to let you know that the majority that are in this room are from outside of Edmonton.
Yeah.
We have, or you already said this, you guys, I was 5 minutes late. There's Spruce Grove, Sherwood Park, St. Albert, Fort Saskatchewan, and some that are rural, like, I mean, acreage living in those areas, so just.
So just as a poll, how many of you in this room have not gone somewhere in the last month, either for medical or getting groceries or social or religious, because you did not have a ride or you didn't feel comfortable driving? How many of you have had an unmet transportation need? Last 6 months. Yeah. Yeah, so even though, and I suspect, are the majority of you driving? Yeah. Is there anyone not driving? Yeah. And so and have you had unmet transportation needs?
No, Mike.
Oh, you haven't? Yeah. So the importance of having a spouse, isn't it? Yeah, yeah. But it's for sure a big issue.
So everybody here is still driving, right? It's just so that the interest in coming is looking at how long can that go on,
Or
right?
the transition.
How long can you keep driving? When is it safe and how do we do this?
For me, it's the evening. I don't drive at night now. So
Yes.
there's been a few things here that I didn't come to because of that.
Yeah. Yeah, so the comment was that night driving, as you get older, and you're not alone, as we get older, driving at night is something that we engage in less frequently, and it's because of the changes in our visual system with age, and you don't see as well at night. I think we also get a little bit wiser as we get older as well. How many of you have thought about transitioning from the driver's seat to the passenger seat? That's great. And how do you feel about that?
Personally,
Yeah.
I'm okay.
Okay, good.
And I spent 10 years getting my dad out from behind the wheel with progressive Alzheimer's.
Yes.
And we got him de-licensed. My wife actually did the dirty, the doctor would. And he went patiently to the remedial driving classes until he finally found somebody who could sweet talk him into an examination that got him his license back.
Yeah, and isn't that
In
frustrating?
the face of all kinds of evidence that we shouldn't be anywhere near the driver's seat.
Yeah. That's a really good point. And we know that happens all the time. And that's the importance of having presentations like this, and it's why it's important to have good information out there, and that and again, it's not age that makes a person unsafe to drive, it's an illness. Unfortunately, there's just a strong relationship. The older we get, the more likely we're going to have one of the illnesses that affects our ability to drive. But and that's where I think that our policies and legislation need to come in terms of, for example, physician engagement. There's a lot of physicians who do attend to the driving issue, and particularly with an illness such as a dementia, because we know with a progressive dementia that it's not will you become unsafe to drive, it's when will you become unsafe to drive. So we need our physicians to be engaged in talking to their patients and to the families about starting to prepare for that transition. Unfortunately, not all physicians are comfortable doing that, and as you've identified, some of them, they just ignore it. One of the difficulties is in Canada, 7 of our provinces mandate physicians to report medically unfit drivers. So in 7 of our 10 provinces and all 3 territories, physicians are mandated to report. 3 jurisdictions do not have mandatory reporting. In Quebec and Nova Scotia, physicians can report, it's discretionary, they can report, but they're not obligated to report. And Alberta has absolutely no requirement. They can or they can't, but Alberta doesn't say it's mandatory, Alberta doesn't say it's discretionary, Alberta just says you can do what you want. My take on that, and it depends on what research article you read, but physicians who are practicing in mandatory reporting provinces, it seems to me it would be a lot easier to have the conversation with the patient. You could say, Joe, you've got Alzheimer's disease, you've had it for 4 or 5 years, and now it's time where I'm worried about your driving. I am required by law to report you to the motor vehicles, Department of Motor Vehicles. That seems to be a lot easier conversation than if you're in a province which has no requirement, or where the physician says you can report or you cannot report. Unfortunately for the physicians, there's often pushback. So the physician does say to the person, I'm going to send in this report that says you're no longer fit to drive. And all of a sudden the patient's angry, and every time the patient goes to see Dr. Brown, that's the first thing they talk about, is you took away my driver's license. So that's where we need more support for our physicians, but we need more education for the general public. And the physicians aren't reporting people in terms of medical fitness to drive just because they feel like doing it that day. They're doing it because they have real concerns about the person's competency behind the wheel. So that's why sessions like this are so important. I know that what I've done with my family physician is I've given him permission to report me to driver fitness and monitoring if I have an illness that affects my ability to drive. And I've had conversations, and I say, I may end up with a dementia, and every time I come in to see you, I'm going to give you grief for taking away my license, and they don't take it away, but they report. I said, but just ignore it, because then it's the dementia talking, not me talking anymore. So that's one thing that you all can do, is you can go and have the conversation with your physician and say, if I end up with an illness, I'm giving you permission to send in this report that says I should no longer be behind the wheel. The other thing that we need to get away from is we need to get away from people having driving evaluations that show they're incompetent to drive, and then they go and have a road test from someone that gives them the license back. That's jeopardizing individual safety, and it's jeopardizing public safety, and somehow or other we need to get away from that.
Sorry, could you just, again, which provinces are the ones that are not mandatory?
Sure, yeah. So all 7 provinces and all 3 territories mandate physicians to report a medically unfit driver. And some of the common conditions would be, for example, epilepsy, or if a person has diabetes and they may be hypoglycemic. So there's a whole whack of medical conditions, and some are easier to think about in terms of their impact on driving. So Ontario and Quebec and Nova Scotia have what's called discretionary reporting. So physicians are aware that there's medical conditions that affect a person's ability to drive, and they are free to report, but they're not mandated to report. And Alberta doesn't have any legislation. They don't say discretionary or mandatory. They just say, do what you want.
The province of Alberta, it's the responsibility of the individual to report to Alberta Transportation if you've got one of these diseases, and Parkinson's is recently been listed in there.
Yeah,
If you drive knowing that you have Parkinson's in your serious accident, this is as good as driving without a license, because your license is not valid.
yeah, that's a really good point. So the comment was that, driver fitness and monitoring, which is our Department of Motor Vehicles, so driver fitness and monitoring is the entity in Alberta that grants a license and that revokes a license. So physicians don't revoke licenses, but they report into driver fitness and monitoring. There are, in fact, the legislation in Alberta requires all of us, if we have a medical condition that can affect our ability to drive, we are to report to driver fitness and monitoring. The difficulty with that legislation is, first, most people don't know about it. And second, if you did know about it, what medical conditions do you report? So some of them are obvious. If you have diabetes, or if you have epilepsy, or you have dementia, those ones probably are pretty easy to think, oh, I better see if this is going to affect my license. But there's so many illnesses. I broke my leg. I fell down and I broke my right leg, and I'm going to be in a cast for 3 months. Should I report this to driver fitness and monitoring? Or I broke my arm, or I've had some surgery. There's no clear understanding from the populace as to what you should report and what you shouldn't report. In terms of what I would call episodic conditions, like you fractured your arm, or you fractured your leg, broken your leg, or you've had outpatient surgery, driver fitness monitoring doesn't want to know about those, because by the time they did all the paperwork and had you assessed, then the cast would be off and you would be back to normal functioning. But your point is a really good point. If you have an illness that you think affects your ability to drive, you should be contacting driver fitness and monitoring and saying, should I or shouldn't I? The other thing that you have to be concerned about is your automobile insurance. And so if you have an illness, and again, there's no clear like report this or don't report this, so it's being open and transparent with your insurance company, phoning them up. And my experience with this and hearing from some of the people is they phone their insurance company, they say, I don't know. No, go see your doctor. But at least then you have it on record that you called them.
Yeah, what you have to do with your insurance company is that was exactly the same thing happened to me. What do you want me to do about it? You put a note in my file, because again, it's reported. If you're in an accident, you have reported you have.
Exactly. Yeah. Did everyone hear that? Did everyone hear that? So this gentleman, he has notified his insurance company, and they basically said, well, what do you want me to do about it? But he said, put a note in my file, because if something happens and I have an accident, at least you have a record that I called in and I told you I have this illness, and I've done my due diligence, so to speak. That's the other thing. Alberta's a really complex province in that most provinces in Canada have a single insurer. So in Saskatchewan, for example, all automobile insurance goes through SGI, Saskatchewan Government Insurance. In Manitoba, there's one provincial insurer. In BC, there's one provincial insurer. In Ontario, there's one provincial insurer. So everybody gets their insurance from that one entity. In Alberta, we have dozens of companies that we can buy our insurance from. And so it's a little bit more difficult to navigate through and to figure out who offers what and what you're supposed to tell your insurance company. Yes?
When you're renewing your driver's license at registries, there is a line that you are initialing and signing off on that you have told your current or previous medical conditions.
That's right.
So again, that null and voids your
Yeah.
insurance or anything else if you do a false claim that you have no medical problems.
Yeah, exactly. And the point is that when we renew our driver's license, we're obligated by law to report medical conditions. But what happens, say, I just renewed my driver's license, and let's say in 3 years from now, I'm diagnosed with a medical condition. Am I supposed to, and who knows what medical condition? How do I know which medical condition to report? Do you know what I mean? The one thing that there is, I don't want to call it a safeguard, there's a policy, and I suspect that most of you know it in the room, that at age 70 and age 75, and then every 2 years thereafter, you have to have a driver's medical in Alberta. And the intent is to look for illnesses that affect your ability to drive. And so that at least is helpful in helping to pick up, I think, on some of the conditions that, if you have what I would call functional deficits that affect your ability to drive as a result of an illness.
What happens when you report that you've got an illness, they take that license of yours and they basically cut it in half. And they give you a temporary license, and you have to have medical within a certain period of time. Once they receive that medical, they'll give you an interim driver's license, which should be good for maybe 6 months or until they get your license, because it takes them that long to review the data. What they did with me, they gave me my license for 1 year. Then I had to have another medical, and they gave it to me for 2 years. And this last round, they gave it to me for 4 years, which is ridiculous because Parkinson's is a progressive disease. They don't know that much about it, but they're just going through the little loops on it.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that with us. I mean, there's lots of good things in the system, and driver fitness and monitoring does do a lot of good work, but there's clearly some room for improvement, and there's some broken pieces. And I think one of the take-home messages from this is that we all become more aware of the process. First, we become aware of some of the medical conditions that affect a person's ability to drive, and dementia, certainly. Parkinson's disease is one of those. Diabetes is one of those. Epilepsy is one of those. If we have some of those, or one of those conditions, and there's others that are probably obvious. You have some changes in, you have macular degeneration, or some things that affect your vision, your sensory, your motor, that it would be obvious that you might think, well, I better go talk to my doctor about this. And then work with driver fitness and monitoring to make sure that if you are safe to drive, you continue, you follow through in their regulations, their requirements, and if you're unsafe to drive, that you give up your license and you not be behind the wheel. Does anybody else listen?
I was just saying that I went on the driver fitness and monitoring website just now, and Parkinson's is listed.
Yeah.
But it says neurological disorders, example MS, Parkinson's disease.
Yeah, yeah. So one of the things, are there any more questions regarding that? This is a really good conversation. Yes.
Yeah, I just went through a driver's examination for renewal of my license, and nowhere on the form that my doctor filled out did it list Parkinson's. They have it listed in other.
Yeah.
And he didn't put anything in. He said, well, you don't have any of these that they're asking for. So I took it to transportation and told him I had Parkinson's. They said, he should have written it in.
Yeah.
So I don't know why they either haven't updated the form to list Parkinson's, but it was certainly not on the form that I was asking.
Well, you can well imagine that the form that the physician gets to fill out, and they are in the process of introducing a new form. I think they're trialing it right now with a small group of physicians. You can well imagine that they can't list all of the illnesses on that form, or it would be like a novel. So I think what they've done, my recollection from the form, is they group it in terms of, does the person have any sensory, are there any conditions that affect their sensory functioning? That would be, for example, if you had multiple sclerosis, or if you had anything that affected your vision. And then they have motor, does the person have any motor, and then cognitive. But I'm not familiar, I don't know what form your physician filled out, so.
Well, there's only one form that comes off the transportation site. they
Yeah.
print it off, fill it out, and I took it to, like I say, to the registry. They said, so ended up having to take it back to my doctor and to write in that I have Parkinson's.
Yeah, yeah,
It's well managed. I could be renewed for 2 years.
yeah.
And then I took it back and I did it. But
Yeah, I've got the form here, there's nothing mentioned on it at all, although the emphasis should be on the doctors to report it under either.
Yeah,
But a lot of them don't like to report it because they don't want to be the bad guy taking away your license or having it reviewed negatively.
that's, yeah, and so the comment is that, and that, not surprisingly, they don't have the list of all the medical conditions, but the physician has the option to write in an illness, and part of that is what we need to, I guess, better educate our physicians on what are some of the real high-risk medical conditions. But having said that, and your point was really important, some physicians just do it and they're ready to accept the backlash that they get from patients. And some physicians, I mean, who wants to be beat up every day about talking about driving? So some physicians probably aren't as diligent as they should be. But that's where I think it's important for every one of us to have conversations with our family physician and give them permission. Say, you know, we know that it's illness that affects a person's ability to drive, it's not age, and you're in a better position than I am to know what illnesses will affect my ability to drive. So I'm giving you permission to have that conversation with me, and I'm giving you permission to have that conversation and to send that information to Driver Fitness and Monitoring. I mean, they don't need your permission, but it helps in that relationship in the office. And then, like I say, I know that if I develop a dementia, if you look at the dementia literature, that I can give my physician permission to take my license, to report me to Driver Fitness and Monitoring, and to take my license away if I'm no longer confident. But when it comes to that point, I may start giving pushback to my physician and be belligerent and angry and hostile with him because it's now the disease talking. But at least the physician knows that. At least my physician knows that I want him to report me. And then if I do develop a dementia, like Alzheimer's disease, and I get angry at him for taking my license away, he understands that when I was of sound mind, he's doing what I wanted him to do, and that he's not going to listen to the disease talking, he's going to listen to what I wanted him to do when I was of sound mind.
So there was a new form developed, it was either 2015 or 2016 for medical. Not all doctors have downloaded it into their systems yet. Pretty soon it will be mandatory that they actually don't give it to the patient, they will submit it directly to the government.
That's right,
Instead of all
yeah.
the channels through
Yeah.
registry, but there is the new form that does list it, as well as sleep apnea and several other things that people don't even think about.
Thank you for that. I know there's a new form because I was part of that group that developed the form. My understanding is, and they may be finished the pilot phase of it, is they wanted to have a group of family physicians and maybe specialists work with it and make sure that it works, and then they're going to have physicians throughout the province use it. And the procedure will change if it hasn't already. That traditionally, up to this point, when it's time to go for a driver's medical, you get the form, you take it to your physician. The physician fills it out, gives it back to you, and you're supposed to take it to your motor vehicles branch or Driver Fitness and Monitoring. Well, you know what's wrong with that process right off the bat. So the person leaves the office and he looks at the form, he or she looks at the form, and the physician says, I'm recommending revocation of the license. They throw that form in the garbage, they go get another form, and then they go to a Mediclinic, and they get someone who doesn't know their medical history to fill out the form that they're safe to drive. And that's why Driver Fitness and Monitoring, the form will go directly from the physician right to Driver Fitness and Monitoring. It won't go, the patient will not be the intermediary. Yes?
So you're saying that when you turn 70, you have to have a medical?
A driver's, what's called a driver's medical.
Do you have to pay for that?
Yeah,
Is it 75?
yeah. I think it's at 70, 75, and every 2 years thereafter.
Yeah, 75, you're free.
At 75, you're free.
Yeah, as the doctor said, next one you don't pay for it because you'll be 75, but now
Yeah.
you owe the money.
So,
At 70, you pay.
so if you go to renew your license, do they tell you to go and do this, or do you have to do it before?
You get a notification in the mail.
But they're not sending anymore, are they? They're, like for
They won't
registering
be,
your
no.
car, it's, you
Yeah.
have to do it on your own.
My husband just got a notification, so
Oh, so they're still doing it
to
for driving?
the best of my
license?
knowledge, they're still sending out, yeah.
It's starting in the new year, they're not gonna be doing it, the onus is on you to renew your license for your vehicle and your driver's license. You're still doing it for the next few months, yeah.
I will check on that and then I can communicate with Parkinson Alberta. I have a hard time believing that for a driver's medical, that there won't be some kind of notification to the individual that they are required to complete that driver's medical in order to have their license.
I think you get notification for that one, but your
Yeah.
normal renewal,
Yeah, no, so renewals, and we're not worried about renewals, it's the driver's medical. And like I say, in fact, I can phone driver fitness and monitoring and find out from them. But it seems to me that that's something that you will continue to get notification that you need to have it. Say you're 74 years old in 3 months, 6 months, you will get a notification that you have to have a driver's medical in order to renew your license at age 75. And then it's every 2 years thereafter.
And I thought you said it's 70 as well?
At age 70 is your first driver's medical, and then 5 years later, there's another driver's medical, and then every 2 years thereafter. So 75, 77, 79, 81.
Is that just Alberta?
No, most, well, I shouldn't say that, but a lot of jurisdictions, not only in Canada, but the United States, Australia, and I think in Britain as well, that they have triggers for what we would call driver's medicals. The age varies and the process varies across jurisdictions, but a lot of jurisdictions, like I say, have this driver's medical requirement. And rightfully so, in that it is what our our system is looking for, is people who have developed illnesses as a result of the aging process. And we know that we are more likely to have illnesses as we get older, and they're looking for those illnesses that affect driving competency.
Is there a difference between a driver's medical and just an ordinary medical, yearly medical?
Yeah, your yearly medical is where your physician is looking for identified conditions, and they aren't necessarily related to driving.
Okay.
Whereas the driver's medical, they're looking at,
I get one yearly, so.
yeah. Yes.
Suppose, like, I got Parkinson's, but it's mild, okay, and the doctor reports that they ripped my license from me, or?
No, not at all. No, and in fact, I don't know of a jurisdiction in the world that takes a license away just because you have a medical condition. What they're looking at is whether that illness affects your functional ability to drive. So they're looking at functioning. So just having, for example, Alzheimer's disease, or having Parkinson's disease, or having macular degeneration doesn't mean that they're going to automatically revoke your license. But what it is it's a red flag that they should look and see if you're still functionally okay to drive. And they concentrate on, and that's why at the beginning of my slide I put sensory, motor, and cognitive. Those are the 3 categories of functional abilities that they look at in terms of driving fitness, because those are the abilities that we use behind the wheel every time we get behind the wheel. So if you have macular degeneration to the point where you have blind spots, you probably, they will assess that. They will send you to an ophthalmologist, and the ophthalmologist will give the rating in terms of whether you should be behind the wheel. If you have multiple sclerosis, and initial diagnosis, they may do the functional assessment and you're just fine. But as the disease progresses, then they'll see if you're functionally able to drive. Dementia is another good one, Alzheimer's disease. So 2/3 of people in the early stages of dementia are safe to drive. 2/3. So if a person gets a diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease and our licensing authorities were taking licenses away just because of the diagnosis, they're taking away licenses from 2/3 of the population that are safe to drive. And like I say, I don't know any motor vehicles branch that takes licenses away just based on diagnosis. Even illnesses like epilepsy and diabetes, in the 1940s, if you were diagnosed with epilepsy, you couldn't drive. But we've progressed so far, and it's not the label, but it's what the disease does to you that makes the difference in terms of whether you can be behind the wheel. Yeah. So don't anyone leave this room today thinking just because you have a diagnosis of Parkinson's disease that they're going to take your license away. They're not.
So I just want to clarify, I think Ed said that if you don't report that you have Parkinson's to your insurance, that your insurance is not.
No.
What'd you say, Ed?
No.
What'd you say?
No.
I just said that most insurance companies, when you report to them, they don't even know why you're calling me.
Right.
But the articles that I've read that say you should report it and should have to be on file. If any big accident comes up and there's a big lawsuit or something, you've reported it. They knowingly have given you the insurance, so you're covered without any strings.
Because some insurance companies have failed to pay on your behalf because of the accident and you failed to say you had Parkinson's.
And this is a really complex issue because there's different insurance companies, and so I think the best advice that I can give, and there's, as most of you know, there's nothing black and white in terms of insurance. There's lots of gray. My recommendation is that if you have been given a diagnosis, for example, of Parkinson's disease, first off, we know that at some point there's a good probability that you'll be unsafe to drive. So that's right away, you need to start preparing for that. To be on the safe side, and because we've got so many insurance companies that offer insurance, automobile insurance in Alberta, is to phone your insurance company and say, I have been given a diagnosis of Parkinson's disease, and I don't know what the legislation is, so I'm just reporting that to you in terms of what my requirements are with my insurance. In other words, you're asking them to tell you what you need to do in order to make sure that your insurance is valid. And then in your case, they said, I don't know, and you said put it on file, then you have done your due diligence, as I understand from the insurance companies.
You might be better off to email that to.
Yeah. Well, that's really good. The comment was it would be a really good idea to email them. So either get the name of the person that you talk to, get their email address, or get the email address of your agent, and send an email or send a letter, registered letter, and say, I just had this conversation, I have just received a diagnosis, or I have Parkinson's disease, and I felt that it was my responsibility to let my insurance company know. This is what they've said, I've asked them to put it on my file.
They've also told them that I was reported to Alberta Transportation for my license, so they knew that I was covered through my license, and I also reported to the insurance.
Yeah. So I think that it's, because they're, let's say that you were diagnosed with Parkinson's disease and you didn't notify anyone, and 3 years down the road you have a crash and there's a fatality. You don't want to be on the hook for not having any insurance.
By the way, the insurance can't deny it.
No, it doesn't affect your insurance, no.
No, and
The insurance can only deny on your own damages.
And what would be interesting, and if Parkinson Alberta is interested, We work quite closely with the Mart Center, we work quite closely with the Insurance Bureau of Canada. And one of the fellows at the Insurance Bureau of Canada knows this area inside and out. And if you would like to have him come and talk to you about this, we can make arrangements for that. Because it is a really important issue, and it's not one that I am as knowledgeable about as I am about medical conditions and driving and sensory and motor and functional abilities, that type of thing. So if that's of interest to you, we could make arrangements to have Fritz come and give a presentation. Would that be helpful?
You like that? Does that warrant a full speaker series? Like a morning session?
Yeah.
It'd be hard to go for 2 hours on just that topic.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you may want to back it up on, have something else,
Yeah.
have two or three speakers.
Yeah, okay,
Yeah.
okay.
But
I
it's
walked
a-
up to the front here only to say, do you guys need to stretch? We typically at an hour
Oh, okay,
stretch.
sorry.
We don't stop, we don't stop. Okay. Do you need to stretch? Yep, okay. So, just, so don't walk away and don't leave and stuff. Do you just, who's gonna, okay, should we do this? Okay, here we go, the reach. What did you call it, Gus? So to one side and the other. These are some of our exercise moves that people come here and do in this very room. Okay, and should we do power up kind of? We'll squat down, and at least when you get up, put your shoulder blades back for a posture one, okay? So down and up. It's hilarious. I think there's like 6 people from Edmonton here, and everybody else is from somewhere else. But that's great. Yeah. Down and up. One more. Oh, that felt good. Good. Anything else we should do? We can just look from one side to the other side. We won't do the full arm swing because I'd hit one. But we will twist. Okay. Carry on.
Susan, can I
Yeah,
ask you,
sorry?
will we be able to get any of these,
Yes, I brought a whole case of them.
Of the books, but you're talking about the PowerPoint?
yeah, the power part?
Oh, the part, yes, you can, yeah,
So what we typically do, if you're willing to share it,
I am.
we then send it out to everybody that was in attendance afterwards.
Yep.
Okay?
Yep. Can I ask while we're waiting for some people to come back, where's everybody from?
County surgeon
From where? Sturgeon County?
by Gibbons.
Gibbons, okay.
Parkland County,
Parkland by, and what's the location?
toward North Moscone.
Oh, okay.
Spruce Grove.
Spruce Grove? Spruce Grove? Sherwood Park?
Fort Saskatchewan.
Fort Saskatchewan? From Edmonton? County of Strathcona? Edmonton? Edmonton?
Fort Saskatchewan.
Fort Saskatchewan?
St. Albert.
St. Albert?
Spruce Grove Park, huh?
Spruce Grove? Stony Place. Stony Place? Well, in fact, everybody in the room, the survey that I talked about, we included all of those, so Parkland County, Sturgeon County, Lamont County, went to Strathcona, and we did down by Millet, so we did all of the counties around, and including the city of Edmonton. So how many of you, while we're waiting, how many of you have looked into alternate transportation? Transportation outside the private vehicle or the public system? So transportation outside of your private vehicle or the public system, like buses or LRT. I'll talk a little bit about that because I think that's where I see this area where we need to go, is, and particularly in the rural areas, but in Edmonton as well. So if you have Parkinson's disease and you're no longer safe behind the wheel, what's the probability that you're going to use Edmonton Transit? Not much. Or what's the probability that you're going to use St. Albert Transit to come into Edmonton? Or St. Albert Transit, you know?
I happen to live right across from the main bus depot.
But as your disease
in St. Albert,
progresses,
So I'm lucky, I can
Yeah.
get into the city quite easily.
but there's lots of times, that let's say that, that you do use St. Albert Transit, but then there's a event in the evening, and it's going to run till 10:30, 11. You're not gonna use it.
Would you mind using this?
Oh, yes, thank you. No, not at all.
Is that better?
Whoa.
That's really, but it's mostly because we're filming this
Okay.
and hoping that others can watch it as well, and then they can hear for sure. Great, thanks.
Yes.
Even moving, like we moved close to the LRT so that, because I knew that this driving would become a problem. And there's no way we can even go there anymore, because by the time we get off, first of all, we take a bus there, or even if we drive there. But try to go down that slope with this wheelchair, we're looking for trouble.
Yeah.
You just can't do it.
So a lot of the work, can you hear me? Is that better? Is that working? A lot of the work that we're doing at the MARD Center is related to this, what I call alternate transportation for seniors. So it's transportation outside of the private vehicle and outside the public transportation system. And St. Albert is a good example where you have transportation provided by volunteer drivers at your St. Albert 50 Plus Club. There's a number of alternate transportation service providers in the city of Edmonton that provide, they either use paid drivers or volunteer drivers. In the rural areas, unfortunately, there aren't very many of those service providers, but we need them. So just recently, the MARD Center, put out a call for a proposal for a rural community in Alberta to submit a proposal to work with us to increase the efficiency of the service that they have. And we're going to use software to create efficiencies. And Wetaskiwin has a handy bus service, and they provide over, I can't remember that, but they provide a lot of rides per year. And so we're going to work with them to increase the efficiency of their scheduling the rides and their dispatching their drivers. But we've just put out another proposal to work with our community in rural Alberta that doesn't have any transportation for seniors, and we will work with them to get that transportation service implemented, and then we'll evaluate it. And then we've got other projects coming out in the next 2-3 years to continue to work with communities to get more of these services available. So if you live, for example, in Lamont or Mundare, and you want to stay and age in place, and if you read the newspapers, that's the new lingo. Everybody wants to age in place. Well, how can you age in place, and particularly in the rural areas, if you don't have transportation? So it's just fundamental. So increasingly, the hope is that we will have more of that type of transportation. I didn't put it in my overhead, but on our MARD website, so, and I can put this into my PowerPoint when we send it out. So if you go into our medically at risk driver, www.mard.ualberta.ca, in the bottom corner of our home screen, we have a map of Alberta, a map of BC, and a map of Manitoba. And if you click on each of those maps, but let's click on Alberta right now. If you click on Alberta, it'll bring up a place where you enter data. And let's say you put in Tofield, or you put in Lamont, or you put in Mundare. It will tell you whether there's any of these alternate transportation service providers. So what we do is we update this list regularly, and we do it across the province. So let's say that I'm living in Edmonton and my mom lives in Oyen, and she's just had her license taken away, or she's decided not to drive. I could go onto our map and say, is there an alternate transportation service provider for seniors in Oyen? And if there is, it'll bring, it's a wonderful resource, but we need more of them. Yes?
Saskatchewan's not on that list?
No, and the reason that Saskatchewan's not on that list is I'm not going to phone everybody in Saskatchewan and see if they provide transportation for seniors until the Rough Riders win a Grey Cup.
That'll be a lot of time.
No, we really do need to do Saskatchewan, so we've done every other province but Saskatchewan, yeah. But you can well imagine, it really is a valuable resource, and we try to promote it as much as we can, and we actually do get a lot of hits on it, but we need to make it more people aware of it, so you can spread the good word for us.
In years to come, it won't be a problem because we'll all have driverless cars.
Yeah. This morning on the way to work, they were talking about, they said that we're going to have, none of us will need our driver's licenses by the year 2025, and then we'll have all these driverless cars. I'm thinking, I don't think so. They might in the major cities down in the States, but certainly not in rural Alberta.
Just
Some of the other resources, oh sorry.
I just quickly say that in Sherwood Park, it used to be called SCATS, but now it's called Mobility Bus, I think.
Yeah.
And just for your information, perhaps more than anybody else, they have now put Parkinson Alberta as one of their stops.
Oh,
So
wonderful.
it used to be that you could only go to
Yep.
like a doctor's office or the hospital or something, but they've designated this as a stop.
Yeah, that's great. So so Scouts in Strathcona County, they now have a dedicated stop at Parkinson, Alberta. That's wonderful news.
Yeah,
Well,
just as an idea for other communities that maybe.
I think St. Albert is working on it too, because we had asked at one of our meetings, so.
yeah, great. Yeah, that's exactly the types of initiatives that we need. We also have this wonderful mobility guide, and if you would like copies, we can distribute them. So I brought enough, I think, for everybody in the room. Yes?
They're in the back, you'll get one on your way out.
So this mobility guide, what we do, and I use that term loosely because it's my research assistants that do this, is we phone service providers in and around Edmonton, and we have categories. So we have grocery shopping, meal delivery, hairstyling, foot care, housekeeping, and we obviously don't phone every single business that is involved in this, or we'd be the yellow pages. What we do is we phone and say, do you provide this in-home service to individuals 65 years of age and older? And actually some of them provide it across the age range. And we update this on a regular basis. So there's lots of new businesses coming online because the senior population is growing and they recognize the importance of the population. But it's just a wonderful resource. So if you can no longer drive and you want to get your hair done on a weekly basis and you want to get your hair done every month, there's hairdressers that go to the home. There's denturists that do home visits. There's foot care. It's just a really, really valuable resource. Increasingly, there's meal delivery and meals that are actually quite edible. My husband's I bring this stuff home. My husband's looking through it. And, soon he's going to be ordering for both of us.
Is the target audience for this, just judging from the cover, is it seniors or is it people with disabilities or both?
Both.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
it's seniors and persons with disabilities. Yeah. So hopefully you will find that helpful. There's these other really valuable resources as well, just in terms of the disease, and this is from Parkinson Alberta. I don't know how many of you are familiar with these. And then finally, my cataracts are so bad, I can barely see my hand in front of my face. My arthritis makes it hard to grip things or turn my head. These drugs for high blood pressure really make me dizzy. quit complaining, at least you can still drive. But that just emphasizes the importance of that driver's license for independence and for us to start preparing for the day that we have to transition from the driver's seat to the passenger seat. Because reality is most of us are going to have to make that transition. So we might as well prepare and make it as painless as possible and recognize that not only are you enhancing your safety, but you're enhancing the safety of other people. But there's a cost associated with it, and that cost is the loss of some independence and the loss of some mobility. But I think that we can be innovative and find ways individually and collectively to keep you mobile so that you can maintain as much independence and mobility as you can. So thank you.
I'm always so awful, aren't I? Nothing ever gets a finish. Are there other questions people have that
Yes,
you
for
came
sure.
hoping to get that answers for?
Yes.
I've been trying to get through to, I'm not sure, it's seniors, is it seniors?
Oh, SATs, SAT, Seniors Assisted Transportation. SATs, they are no longer in service. So the,
Well, they told me they changed the name,
yeah,
and, but they said if it's a wheelchair, we don't take it.
yeah. So as I understand it, and I think that I understand it correctly, so SATs is no longer in service. So in Edmonton, just a bit of a history. In Edmonton, we had a number of organizations that provided transportation for seniors, and SATs was one of those. And then there was also Helping Hands, Lifestyle Helping Hands. And then there was a third one, SCATs. And they were operating independently for years and years. But it's a difficult area to work in, and it's always difficult to raise money and to find the operational funds to continue to keep your business open. So about 5 years ago, the three groups came together to see if they could work together and to increase efficiencies. They were going to individually keep their own businesses, but they were going to collectively work together to create some efficiencies in the system. And that umbrella organization for those three providers was and is called Lyft Drive Happiness. So I don't know how many of you have heard of Lyft Drive Happiness. And so they don't provide rides, but it's the umbrella organization. And then these individual entities continue to give rides. Well, SATS is no longer in business. Lifestyle Helping Hands does continue to operate, and they're continuing to operate under Lyft. And then SCATs went on their own. So there's no longer SATs. So you can either call Lyft Drive Happiness, and they will connect you to Helping Hands, or you can call Lifestyle Helping Hands. If you want to use SCATs, then you would phone them independently. Does that help?
Yeah, I'll find it now.
Yeah, it's in our mobility guide.
Okay.
So, but just ignore SATs, because this is, and we update this, so we'll update this we'll have a new version coming out in January of 2017. But so some of the information and the example I just gave, there's one entity that's no longer providing transportation.
Well, just to comment, because they're volunteer drivers, I think you will find that a number of them can take wheelchairs.
Yes, yeah, exactly, yeah. So DATS for wheelchairs, I don't know if you've registered with DATS.
Well, we tried, and now I just got the form again yesterday.
Okay.
But they say it can take up to 6 months, so
Oh boy,
meanwhile,
yeah.
And do DATS allow an
sorry?
Did that allow just the, say, disabled person?
No, the caregiver can ride, and I believe the caregiver rides for free. Yeah, check on that, but the caregiver absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
So one question I have, and that is, if somebody is, you know, not feeling, they're not sure if they're still safe to drive, right?
Yeah.
They know it's questionable, but what about going somewhere to get an assessment?
Yeah, so for individuals who are concerned about their driving competency and whether they're safe to drive or want to get an assessment, there's a number of different assessments that you can go to. So there's the Alberta Motor Association, the AMA assessment, and that assessment I would not recommend for individuals with medical conditions, because the AMA assessment is for basic driving skills, so that you're assessed in terms of whether you can turn on the car and you know the rules of the road, and that's not the problem with individuals with an illness like Parkinson's disease or dementia. There is a driving evaluation called Drive Able, and the Parkinson Alberta has that listed, and it is a driving assessment, and there's an in-office assessment and an on-road assessment, and it's specifically for individuals with medical conditions. And in the interest of disclosure, so that the Drive Able assessment is a research-based assessment, and the evaluation came out of research that was done at the University of Alberta. And that research that was done by my husband, Dr. Dobbs, and he was a cognitive psychologist in the Department of Psychology. So he did the research, and then when it was finished, took the research to practice. So Drive Able, it is a for-profit company, and they charge for driving evaluations, but that's the only way that the evaluation was going to be put out for the public. So it is recognized that a lot of physicians send patients, but like I say, it is a user-pay system. The evaluation is specifically for individuals with cognitive impairment, so it isn't an on-road assessment for anyone with physical disabilities, for example. It would be nice if it was paid for by the government because it's an illness that you're getting the assessment, but it isn't. But as to my knowledge, all driving assessments are going to cost money.
Who gets the results from the Drive Able? Does this go back to the individual report?
Yeah, so the question is who gets the results. If you go for a Drive Able assessment, and there's an on-road or an in-office component and an on-road component. And the assessment is if you score at a certain level that says you're competent in the in-office, they don't take you on road. And if you score in a range that says that you do have a cognitive impairment and that you're really impaired, they don't take you on road. And then there's a group in the middle that they'll take you for an on-road assessment. So not everybody, if you get referred for a drive, if your physician says you should go for a Drive Able assessment, it's a two-part assessment, and not everybody goes on road. Only those that they consider to be indeterminate. And it's in a special vehicle, and there's like James in the driver's seat, and it's a dual brake car. Yeah. And the results go to the physician. They don't go to the individual, and they don't go to motor vehicles. They go to the referring physician. Yes.
Do you have to have a referral to do that? I'm sorry.
Yes, yeah, so you can't phone up Drive Able and schedule an appointment. It's physician referral.
Is the Glenrose Hospital still their driver assessment, or is it not just for seniors anymore?
I'm sorry?
Is it the Glenrose Hospital?
Yes, so the Glenrose, there's also a driving evaluation done at the Glenrose. And Glenrose tends to focus more, I think, on the physical, you know, if a person has had a stroke and they have a paralysis. So it's more the physical as opposed to being strictly a driving evaluation for cognitive impairment.
What is the out-of-pocket cost for
you know, I should know that, I think it's around 300. But I think and I think that the Glen Rose is also about that price. I honestly don't know the price of it, I'm sorry.
I think that's right.
Yeah, it's around $350. I can find that out as well.
So with Parkinson's, it's really a double whammy. You've got cognitive and you've got motors.
Yeah.
For those who have
Yeah.
advanced in the
Yeah.
disease.
Yeah, but I do know that DriveAble does evaluate people with Parkinson's disease because often there is a cognitive component. Any other?
Can you get a copy of your seminar today?
Yes, absolutely. I'm happy to share my slides. And I will put in the online compendium, put that resource in so that you have access to it.
Ed has a document there, which I'm grabbing around the corner. So do you have anything to do with this?
Oh, yes, so there's also, this is just a wonderful resource. And if you need more of these, so this is a brochure that's put out by Hartford Insurance in the United States. And we literally bring these in by the boxfuls. And it's in terms of how to start having that, first off, what to look for, and how to start having that difficult conversation with someone when it's time to move from the driver's seat to the passenger seat. So if you need more of these, we can bring them in. Yeah. I'd love for us to develop these at the MARD Center with the Insurance Bureau of Canada and have it more in a Canadian context. Having said that, the content is relevant irrespective. Yeah. Unfortunately, some of the newer ones are a little bit more targeted to the U.S. population, but these are great. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much for coming out, and we very much appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And let's hope that we have good election results next Tuesday.
So all this stuff is in the back.